comments. Ms. Dudley, has this meeting been properly posted?
Yes, the meeting's been properly posted.
We only have one agenda item tonight, as far as I know. I don't even have the agenda in front of me because I rushed here from the airport. Okay, thank you. So we have two action items, actually. Approval and award of guaranteed energy savings performance contract and a resolution to exceed the revenue limit on a non-recurring basis. Oh, this is the old one. October 17th.
Nope.
Okay, that's October 23rd. Okay, good. That's the right one. But first of all, is there any citizens here to speak tonight? No citizens to speak tonight? Okay, we'll move on with the action items. So the first action item is approval and award of the guaranteed energy savings performance contract. Any discussion? Administration can present what we have. I mean, this has been going on for a while. Yes, a lot of work been put into this. Let's hope that we made progress.
Tonight, we have with us Kevin Pollard, our attorney, and Jonathan and Rob from Siemens, if you want to join us up at the table. They're available to answer any questions that we may have as we go along. What you have in your packet, and then what you were given yesterday, for the most part, for most of you, were red line versions of the final document that has been drafted. The tan-colored one that is the version that you saw back earlier in the month. And the final version with the corrections, changes, edits are included in the white copy. What you had in your packet is identical to the white one, except for the highlighting and the redlining. The notes are on the white version. So I don't know if you want to walk through changes line by line, page by page, or the summary that was handed out identifies the types of changes that were made. It's two-sided. Some of them are just typographical corrections. For instance, there's places where Central Middle School was referred to as Les Paul Middle School, in some places Central and other. We tried to clean that up for consistency. White Rock is another one where you might have seen White Rock or Welk or Waukesha Early Learning Center. We tried to, again, be consistent all the way through the document and clean those up. Some of the language changes are primarily focused on Exhibit A, Section 1.1. There's a fair amount of new language there to address the district's ability to have subcontracting, competitive bidding, and clarification on that the cost is a not-to-exceed amount of $8 million, and that the district contingency funds are to be directed by the district as far as purpose and whether they will be applied to a FIM or not. I don't know if, Kevin, is there anything else significant that?
I think those are the main things. We did add language that we prepared and that Siemens and their attorney agreed to, which basically it gives the district the right to, anytime before the FIMs are commenced, to require that competitive bidding be done. So it's at the district's discretion. Another issue I know that was important to the district was that all systems be open protocol. We talked about that with Siemens. I'm not the engineering expert on that, but essentially the contract already did require open protocol systems, and these guys can probably elaborate on that, but it's a backnet open protocol system, which is compatible with other vendors or other providers.
That's correct.
So I think those were the two big issues from the last meeting that I know that this committee really wanted to see in the contract. Like Lori said, we cleaned up some other things, tried to offer the district as much protection as possible throughout the contract, but those were probably the key issues.
Well, I guess I'll give you guys a few committee members a few moments to look things over or choose to ask questions right away, whichever anyone prefers.
Good. Joe had his hand
You, okay.
It
Mr.
doesn't
Como,
matter.
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I had the first contract, or actually, I don't remember which version of the last contract that really was. But thank you for the hard work, gentlemen. All of the things that we discussed, and there was a very long discussion this last time around, to me appears that got in here. There were some very easy changes, but there were some very difficult changes. I appreciate the bidding language being part of the first exhibit, Exhibit A, and keeping the contract, I guess, relatively clean. But there are some references in the contractual part that refers to the bidding where it was appropriate. So I see how we started in one place and kind of made sure that it flowed all the way through. And Kevin, we're trusting you in that you made sure that those meshed together appropriately.
Yep.
I'd like to just get a little bit better sense of how it will work. If we were to turn to Exhibit A, 1.1A, why don't you just take us through that portion, really understanding how this will work from a subcontractual perspective, because that was, as you pointed out, Kevin, one of the more important things. And how does that impact the guarantee? Just kind of walk us through those details, please. And it could be a combination of all of you.
Sure, I don't know if you guys want to start with that, or?
Feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I think really at any time, I mean, there's a group of FIMs which are outlined in Exhibit A, which, you know, there's different work to be completed on the different facilities. So prior to the commencement of any of that work, Siemens, under the contract, is required to disclose what subcontractors they will be using for that work. At any time before the commencement, the district can require that Siemens seeks out competitive bids to use as the subcontractors. Now, that won't affect the guarantee as long as the work is as long as they're approved, and it won't, unless we insist on using a more expensive vendor, which I don't know why that would be the case. It won't increase the cost. So as far as logistically how that's going to be handled, I don't know if you guys want to kind of elaborate on that. The bidding process.
Yeah, for most of these, we're going to come and say it's the air handling, or we're going to say we're going to pick these vendors to go bid the work. If you have input, Glenn especially, who you like, don't like, we will include those in the bid. We'll evaluate them for the best value and, qualify them to make sure that they're going to do the work we want. They're going to install the equipment that we need to meet our guarantees and to the quality that's required of the school. And before we go ahead with this work, we come back and discuss and make sure you're comfortable with it and we're comfortable with it, and we'll go ahead.
So would you be subcontracting out or doing a bid process only if we request of a specific FIM, or if
For
would
the
you?
most part, I'm required to do it by my own company anyway. We have procurement rules too. They don't expect us to go pick our favorite people or people we're comfortable with. We tend to bid to a group of people we are comfortable and know how to do the work. But
Okay.
we have our own internal processes too that we tend not to take one bid and accept that either. So we would be going through this process anyway, but it's just a little more formalized here, I would say.
Okay.
And from the district's perspective, they would be required to disclose who they intend to use. It would be on us to affirmatively say, for this project, we want you to seek competitive bids.
Okay. So are there any circumstances where the guarantee would need to change?
Contractually, it cannot.
Okay.
I think the only time that would come into place is if we demanded you take, not the lowest bid.
From the most part, the guarantees isn't contingent on the subcontractor. We're going to maintain that and make sure we get the correct work. If we decided we're basing our guarantee on a piece of equipment, it says, well, we don't like that, we want this equipment in our buildings, and it has a different performance standard, we'd adjust for that. But it's unlikely that's going to be the situation, so.
Okay. That's all for now.
Mr. Alter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Who's going to be writing the specs? We already have the work picked out, scope of the work, but I haven't seen anything as far as specs that
So-
people would bid on.
Yeah, so we're following a design build process. So from a specification standpoint, we have the performance parameters that will help drive the efficiencies required for us to meet our guarantees. You know, we have contractors that will, of course, work with the school district on to affirm that they're acceptable, but we will go through and build upon the design that's been put in place. Part of our process is to guarantee no change orders, and it's not because we have significant contingency, quite the opposite in our process. Standard plan spec generally is about 10%, as you know, Mr. Edlin. You know, our process is less than that, and the reason is that we take our contractors through all of the varying systems, pinpointed a general scope and the defined efficiency that we're pursuing. And so we work with our contractors to, first off, in a greater field, to work with them to define what is the best path forward to ensure best performance based on how we have it defined thus far. And then we'll take, say, of 3, boil that down to 2, and then work through a process till ultimately we have assured that our contractors, there are no change orders, that they meet the design intent of our process, and ultimately we have a satisfactory process to move forward. So at the end of the day, the specification will be around equipment, but from a process perspective, it's for us to make sure that in fact they perform to our standards.
My concern, being in the trades for 34 years,
Certainly.
is that 10% is the money that covers us. Because we're gonna design a system, and we're gonna pay somebody to design that system, and that way we have apples to apples on a bid that comes back. What you're telling me is we're gonna put this out to bid with no design specifications and have 3 designs come back, and then somebody's gonna pick the design.
And see, that's not 100% accurate. When we talk about the plan spec process, we talk about an engineer who sits in an office and in a production form, they're driven by typically a boilerplate spec, and they will work towards a common goal, if you will. The purpose of that 10% is because more times than not, a production engineer will many times miss things. They haven't had enough time to spend on site to truly understand the process. From a design build perspective, first off, Siemens is on the hook financially to make sure we perform, hands down. We talk about this $8 million, as long as it's not an owner-directed change order, what we tell you we're going to accomplish here is what contractually we have to perform. And so if we miss something, it's not on the school district's dime, it's on our dime. And so from a performance standard perspective, the assurance you have is beyond simply a 12-month warranty or guarantee. We're talking about guaranteeing the performance of the systems, in this case, for 7 years. And so if our systems do not perform at the level and to the degree that is promised, it's on us contractually, and I believe Kevin will attest to that, to have us come back and financially take care of the situation for the district.
The only area that I've seen that true in is in the energy savings, though. Not in system performance, not in equipment warranty, not in system design. That's 1 year.
Well, taking a step back, if you look at the overall efficiency that we're guaranteeing, in order to maintain that efficiency, we must get everything else that you mentioned correct. Because if we don't, you will not realize that efficiency.
Yeah, I disagree with you there because your contract specifies that the energy savings is an aggregate for the whole district, not for these FIMs. That's what I'm worried about. If we're going to have equipment replaced, boiler rooms redesigned, the energy savings isn't being monitored just for those boilers that we're replacing. We're looking at the energy bills throughout the district. So we can do energy savings in other areas in order to compensate for bad design. I'll just throw that out there as an example. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen.
Certainly.
But there is nothing being monitored at this point that can pinpoint to actual energy savings on these items of energy that's being replaced because we don't have a specific gas meter set up on just our boilers. We don't have specific electrical meters just on our frequency drives. We're not monitoring the equipment for energy. We're going to be looking at the aggregate of the entire district's bills. And so the energy savings is not 100% related to what we're doing in the FIMs.
You know, and Mr. Edlin, I have to say you are 100% correct. And let me expound upon it if I may. from a utility perspective, at the end of the day, the utility budgets that we're talking about today, that we're guaranteeing, I mean, ultimately the financial performance of the things that we're talking about, ultimately, if we look at each individual FIM, the aggregate ultimately creates the benefit for the school district. And candidly, I would think financially speaking, you're looking at the overall aggregate of, are we meeting our performance? You know, will there be a FIM that may not measure up? Will there be others that exceed? Most certainly. And by the way, as we talked about during this entire process, we have something called a safety factor that is already built into this. So if a FIM in fact underperforms, we have already a bit of an insurance policy that is entirely to the benefit of the district that hasn't already, if you will, been taken into consideration with the construction. It's a benefit that's just simply going to be there.
Just 1 second, I want to clarify. There's something in what Mr. Edlund's stated that when we talk about the aggregate, we're talking about the aggregate of the changes. We're not talking about the aggregate of the district's energy bills,
Okay.
which is it?
Well,
Is that-
not
are we
okay, is
talking-
that true, or is that,
Are we talking about the aggregate of the district's energy bills being used to decide how much savings we have, or are we talking about the aggregate of these
Just the
changes?
improvements.
Of these
Just-
improvements?
Just the improvements. Most of this is, I think, option A savings, which mean, we actually do measure them individually, by the way. We'll go out and we'll measure your combustion efficiency of your boilers before we remove them. And we'll bring new ones in, and then we will test the combustion efficiency of those, and that's how our savings are there. We'll stipulate what hours you run them for. We can do calculations at the end of the year. If it was a warmer year or a cooler year, we make adjustments depending on heating degree days. But we actually measure the individual pieces of equipment for their efficiency.
So-
We don't look at your bill for
So
this building and say, well.
For clarification, then, he wasn't 100% correct, because he was saying,
Right, yeah.
Steve was suggesting that we were just going to look at our broader bills, and that was what you're going to use to decide.
No, we
The
look at the
savings.
individual equipment, because we really don't know if if we change the boilers in the building and it turns out you start using that building for 15 hours a day and your electrical bills go up because your lights are on a little bit longer, we can't adjust for that. So we look at the actual piece of equipment we put in and we measure the performance of
Right,
those.
because I couldn't
Yeah.
see how you could do it that
Yeah.
way.
No, it's-
Okay,
and I-
go
yeah.
ahead, Mr. Edlund, I'm
okay,
sorry.
you're measuring combustion efficiency,
Yeah.
but that is not consumption. That there's a difference there. There's a big difference.
No, but our guarantees are based on improved efficiencies of your boilers. The actual hours they run are
That-
based on the heating degree days in that particular year, and we make adjustments for that. So your baseline, if it was, whatever, 7,000 heating degrees days, which is obviously a
Sure,
broad.
but through software, you can adjust things to compensate for that too. I mean, we had a full-time guy in our district, his job was just to monitor energy. And I will say that to save energy, if you turn off a disconnect to a condenser or duty cycle it, sure, you're gonna save energy, because you're not running a motor.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So if, what I'm saying is, energy consumption is not based on equipment efficiency, 100%. And so, to say we're saving energy in the aggregate, first of all, to me this is a bad investment if that's what we're doing, because that's not what this is about. This law allows us to replace equipment and do it outside of revenue limits, because the paybacks are not justifiable in some cases on some of this equipment. So I'm not convinced that energy savings is, should be our main focus of this. My concern looking forward is having somebody looking out for us, and that's why I'm a firm believer in bid and spec and not design build, because we don't have anybody representing us. You guys, I understand that you're gonna be around. You guys want your controls on everything in our district, which is gonna give you, 100% control over us. Whatever your labor rate's gonna be, we have to hire you. We're married to you. There's no divorce. We're married to you,
So if,
okay?
yeah, if I may, address that, a couple things. First off, and I apologize for, indicating you were 100% correct. I
That's
stand
okay.
corrected. Mr. Woods was making reference to our pre and post studies of all the equipment and everything that we'll be touching to confirm that in fact there's been efficiency. Now, the main driver, and correct me if I'm wrong, for this particular program, in fact, was not energy efficiency, but it was to address the deferred maintenance within the district. The energy efficiency is a side benefit and necessary to take advantage of, Act 32. But the core focus here is to help the school district with the deferred maintenance, throughout. And I think, and this is simply my opinion, I believe this program does a nice job addressing that goal.
Yeah, again, I got to ask you, just part of the process, because I never caught it, or it really wasn't explained to me, but when you did your initial survey, was it done by an engineer? Was it done by a technician? Was it done by, because I'll bring up a specific example why I explained this to Ms. Clifton last night. We have 4 boilers in the boiler room at Waukesha South. Each boiler is, what, 4 million BTUs input, something like that? So we don't run all the boilers all the time. How many, in a peak day, Glenn, how many boilers, would you know?
Glenn, you want to come up and join us, so you can hear heard on the mic as well?
On a peak day, Steve, in a normal winter, we probably run 3 out of the 4 boilers.
Okay,
Give you an example, though, because of the extreme weather we had last year, there were times that we had to run all 4 boilers to maintain temperatures at Waukesha South.
okay, all 4 boilers, then, you get 18 below 0 days, that's even beyond design conditions for our area. Okay. And there's also, how many other boilers that we have down in that mechanical room? 2?
There's 4
4 large ones?
large ones, and then there's the pool boiler. But
Right.
as far as the heating of the building, it's just the 4 boilers.
Well, are the other ones for domestic hot water?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so theoretically, we could incorporate the boilers to be able to take care of domestic hot water, the pool, everything in one system.
You could do that.
Okay. Is that what's being proposed?
I'll be honest, I'm not the engineer to put this job together, so I can't tell you exactly, and he's not here
And,
tonight.
well, that
but
was my question, is who did?
Travis Steinmeister, who is a PE in Illinois. So we had an engineer look at it. We also, on all the other things, we had engineers. Everyone who works for me is pretty much an engineer.
Okay,
So, yeah.
so we were looking at it strictly from an equipment replacement standpoint as a walkthrough, rather than what can we do to improve our efficiency here in system design and overall cleaning up of the mechanical systems.
And if I may address that, I think it's a fair question. As we went through our initial study and some of our design, as we've shared with everybody, the intent here is to design ultimately the most efficient system for the school district. As we went through, we had a preliminary design, but as we go through and further develop, it likely, if there's interest in adding a heat exchanger or something, granted that's additional cost that we haven't taken into consideration, but from an efficiency, best bang for the buck, if you will, what we'd be looking at are the boilers, finding out which mix. Maybe it's a matter of some larger boilers with a pony or shoulder boiler for spring and fall. There's some options here. So as we go through this process, the district has a lot of interest in making sure that we're able to get everything done for this $8 million. And part of that at this point goes into the design and working with our design build contractors and making sure that the overall process drives efficiency. We're able to meet the needs of the guarantee to address Act 32, but also provide the benefit to the school district and provide best design for the school district. So long and the short is, is that heat exchanger, is that side heat, if you will, for the domestic water included? If ultimately that is the most cost-effective way of addressing the overall system, it's an option. Is it today? It's not today.
Okay, so your engineer that came through isn't going to be the one who's going to be bidding and designing the systems that are ultimately going to be installed. It's going to be the subcontractors?
So we have, our engineer is lead, if you will. And so our design build contractors, generally speaking, have professional engineers on staff. They work as teams. As you know, with your firm, your firm does design build work, and so likely you have a professional engineer on staff. And so as you develop your scope and your scheme, and you're working with your clients, you're working out best case, best efficiency, best design. And so as we work with our subcontract partners, such as your firm, our engineer then goes through and will make sure that each of those opportunities are addressed. We're looking to shoot holes in all the varying designs and then take best from each and ultimately deliver something that's best for the school district.
Okay, so if there's a difference between that final design and what we originally said here, that's an additional cost.
No. We're at, so from a cost perspective, this is all on Siemens.
But you said that if we're going to do domestic hot water heating, if that means we get another heat exchanger, that may be an extra.
It's not to the school district. If the school district came back to Siemens and says, by the way, we want you to pave our parking lot. Okay, the $8 million doesn't cover that. We want you to put in an ice cream shop down the street. Doesn't cover that. But as it pertains to the boiler plant, if we come back with a design that maximizes efficiency and kills multiple birds with one stone, so to speak, that's part of our scope, and that's what we're responsible for that performance over the 7 years that we've been talking about, not just typical plant spec that you're going to get basically at 12 months.
Okay. I would have preferred to have had an engineer and paid him the 10% for plan and spec to come up with the best design up front with us, so that as a member of this committee, I knew what I was getting for my money. At this point, approval of this, I have no idea what I'm getting for my money. And I don't know if things are going to be missed. I don't know if it's in our best interest. I don't know if dollars are going to drive it. I don't know if energy is going to drive it. I don't know if cost of equipment's going to drive it. I have no idea. Let me give you one scenario. When we depended on design build to build the swimming pool addition at Waukesha South, the boiler that Mr. Norder was just referring to is installed in an area where there's no combustion air. And the air to get down there between that air supply and where that boiler is all the pool chemicals. The boiler lasted 8 years and had to be replaced last year. So now I'm looking at 7 years down the road, we're going to be doing the exact same thing. When, in my opinion, we should be addressing that now, even if it's not a part of energy efficiency, because in the long run, we're going to save ourselves $40,000, $50,000 of not having to put another boiler in.
The interesting thing in your scenario is that likely you did not have a performance guarantee. You had design build, and then ultimately you had your 12-month warranty. And candidly, after 12 months, good luck getting anybody to come back to help you. I'm sure that was probably the experience of the district. In this particular instance, with our performance guarantee, if we did that pool scenario that you just described, we'd be back here on our dime fixing this.
Are you guaranteeing the boilers for a period of 7 years?
We're guaranteeing the
parts, warranty, everything? Is that what you're saying?
I will answer that one. No, we are not.
Okay. All right.
We are guaranteeing 1 year parts and labor warranty on the equipment, and if there's extended warranties, your manufacturer's warranties hold. We are guaranteeing if that equipment's maintained, we guarantee the performance of
Yeah.
it.
That's what we got on the design build of that boiler installation. Matter of fact, it was a 5-year warranty on the heat exchanger? I can't remember, Glenn.
That's fairly typical.
And then, and we were beyond that period, so there we
So
were.
you're-
I mean, we've had energy contractors come here before and do the same thing. We put in high-efficiency equipment, and within 3 years, we ripped it out because the costs were so expensive to maintain the equipment. And as somebody who services equipment, 85% non-condensing boilers, and now we're going from 4 boilers to 8 boilers, means we've doubled the amount of labor that we have now in our maintenance budget to be able to maintain 8 boilers versus 4 boilers. So our energy savings, that part isn't factored into the energy savings. It's part of maintaining the equipment to get the energy savings, but somebody's got to pay the labor, the parts, and about every three years maybe, you're going to need to tear them down, major tear down, and clean them up.
You know what, the heat exchanger that you just mentioned, the 5 years, the product warranty is important. What I'd like to suggest is, for the purposes of what we're talking about, let's set aside that product warranty, and let's talk about the system design and that performance, because ultimately this performance contract, candidly, is likely different than anything that you've done similarly with the district in that regard. So if we were to put the system, near this chlorine, was it the cold air makeup or what have you? Was taking
Combustion air.
Combustion air, thank you. Was pulling in chlorine gas, which caused the boilers to corrode. I mean, from a design standpoint, that's on us. The product itself has its warranty, and there is no one that's gonna come in from anywhere and tell you that they're going to, without charging you more, extend that product, the product warranty in of itself. Is that available? Sure, you can go to Sears and buy your microwave and you can buy an extended warranty. We're happy to sell you an extended warranty on just the widget. We're guaranteeing the performance of the system, which is what's enabled here through the state statute.
That's all I have for now.
That's all you have now. Any other questions? Mr. Como?
Well, just carry on with that example. So you install whichever film, it doesn't matter. It doesn't perform, let's say, year 2 or 3. Take us through that. So you take the measurements, you're coming back to us, you report on it, and you say, this isn't performing. What do you cover, what don't you cover? How's that process look? How does that
Yeah,
work?
we'll, if it doesn't perform, we'll do a calculation base. It's not, the efficiency is wrong, it's not performing. We'll calculate, so your shortfall that year is $1,000 in our guarantee, whatever it is. There's 2 things we do. One, we pay you $1,000, and we have an option there is we can either continue to pay you through the end of our contract, or we can come back at our cost and basically get it back to where it's meant to be performing. They're
And
the
you get
2
to make
options.
that choice.
And we have that choice, yes. We do
We
pay
can't
for.
force you to do
No.
one or the other.
No, we have to pay the shortfall that you've incurred, and then we have the option to either continue to pay it or to remedy the situation on our dime.
Okay.
Mr. Evan?
Thank you. Glenn, just, we've got a lot of work in here in the plumbing area, toilet tanks. Do we really have a lot of toilets with tanks in our schools?
We still do, yes.
Really? Is there a reason we still do?
Just to the fact of cost of replacing.
Okay. And how much are we gonna spend per toilet to upgrade to these upgrades?
Per toilet,
Yeah,
I can't answer that right now. I'm sorry. I mean, they're, throughout the district, the urinals and the toilets and their configuration vary somewhat significantly.
okay.
To give you a per unit cost, I don't have that handy.
The
Well,
actual quantities in the district are listed on page 3, Exhibit A. There's a table there.
Page 3.
Just
Oh.
to break in a little bit, as I recall, and let's go back to how the contract was set up and how the bid out was done. We had a scope of work, a composite scope of work, and the bid was to that composite, was it not?
It was.
Okay, so it wasn't that that we asked the bidders, and we ended up only having one bidder. We didn't ask them to itemize per task and estimate what the cost would be. It was a total package bid,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, correct.
That was the way we decided to do it, that's the way we submitted it, and that's what was bid on, it was the total package bid. And what we've asked in the modification of the contract is to be able to have transparency on individual items as the bids are requested and then awarded, so that we have individual point-by-point cost. We don't have point-by-point cost required from the bidder at the front end of the process, but we are kind of requiring, by monitoring what's going on, the point-by-point cost throughout the process. Is that correct, with all these changes in the contract? Would you say that's pretty much?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, if nothing else, what we did was create it so that the district has authority throughout the process to step in and require bidding.
Right, and the time to define the specifications for what you want to do is prior to the bid. That's how you decide what you bid to. And if you set, and most of those specifications, whether they were general or specific, came from the study, which Siemens did, in conjunction with our Mr. Norder and Ms. Clifton, in terms of what we wanted to accomplish more specifically within this task. Is that correct?
Yes.
More or less? Mr. Norder? Yeah. So, I can understand a lot of where Mr. Edlin's coming from in some issues, and I have some concerns myself with the statute, to be honest with you. But the process that we followed, to me, is like a normal bidding process. You know, you set up a proposal, you ask people, request for bid from that proposal, and then once you get the bid in, you can question whether you set the specs right, but the bid's the bid and the project's the project, and if we want to make a change, there's what you call a change order. And that may require additional funds, it may not. Is that correct?
And so our process is not exactly that way, you know, again, from a design-build standpoint. To take the mind of one individual and define something versus working with a team, if you will, to define a best outcome for the district. That doesn't then go to, let's define specifications and then go through a typical process, bid spec process. It's a proposal process where we'll go through and make sure that the contractors we're working with are providing best outcomes that we as Siemens are going to guarantee as legally required.
So, just to be clear, then what you're saying is that it provides more flexibility for us to select a better outcome without having to pay more,
Correct.
the way it's set up.
Correct.
And by monitoring what you do from a bidding point of view, we can highlight where we think, let's say if we see a set of bids and someone's being selected, but they don't meet our requirements. In other words, we don't agree with the quality of the work, or we agree with their track record. We can highlight that to you and say, we're very uncomfortable with this bidder. Even though they're the low-cost bidder, we don't believe that their quality of work and the scope of work meets our standards.
And we'll go through that vetting process with you up front
Yeah.
to make sure that, you know, the contractors that we're going to be working, that ultimately may be doing work for the district, are satisfactory to you.
So the hard work of making this project work is ahead of us. As a district, as Mr. Norder and Ms. Clifton and our entire staff, in terms of monitoring each individual bid, making sure we're getting good value for our money. So it's really incumbent upon the district, as we move through this process, because we put all this extra language in the contract, to do the monitoring as we go forward. Would you agree with that, Mr. Norder?
I would.
Okay. So the stress is on you, correct? Okay. The buck stops there. I was pointing at Mr. Gray. The buck stops over there. Is that correct, Mr. Gray? Yep. Okay. Mr. Edlin?
Okay, to that end, who's going to be representing the district to address all those concerns you brought up? When you say "we," who is the "we"? We don't have a PE on staff to be able to make the professional assessments regarding performance of a contractor.
Are you asking me that question, Mr. Edlin?
I am.
I would be glad to answer that question.
Okay.
That's what we have an administration for.
But the
The
administration.
administration, excuse me, let me finish answering the question.
Okay.
We have an administration that we've hired to run the school district. If they feel that they need to add a professional or bring in a professional or a consultant to adequately do their job, I would expect them to do that.
Then let's get that clear right now. Superintendent Gray, are we going to be adding a PE to represent the district to work with Siemens?
Hold on, one moment here. I don't really think that's correct, Mr. Edlin. I think that's what's going to happen as the time goes on. If they feel they need that resource, they can add that resource. But to say, are we going to be adding them at this point in time? I don't think that's a fair question. But go ahead and answer it, Mr. Gray.
Okay, I do think it's a fair question because we're about to make an $8 million decision with nobody representing us at this point. So I would like to know the intentions of the administration going forward, because you're right. We do hire the administration and a, team to run the district for us.
But
At this
they're
point,
free to answer the question.
at this point, we do not employ a PE to be able to professionally work with Siemens to be able to address those professional concerns that you brought up.
They're free to answer the
Okay.
question.
I would expect we wouldn't need to hire a full-time person, but we certainly could contract for those services. There's a number of organizations around that could provide the PE support on a contract basis.
Okay, somebody that's specifically geared towards each project that's going to be designed and implemented. I wouldn't want to hire an electrical engineer to oversee HVAC.
Right, I understand that, but I mean, one, then if we hired a PE, or if we even had a PE on staff, they're not gonna have all that expertise either, so, I would think that if we needed some PE expertise, for a given project, we would be able to contract for that in the event that, perhaps there's such different types of projects that one person can handle it, we would be able to go to another.
You're not on record at all now.
Just like anything else, when, you know, if we were gonna build put an addition on, we would hire an architect plus some engineers for different pieces of that. And I don't know why we couldn't do that same thing for this type of project.
So in the end, we would be looking at hiring a consulting engineer to represent us?
Correct.
Or a
We could
consulting
if we
engineering
needed
firm?
to.
We
Yeah.
could.
Yeah.
I think that's at the
Yeah.
discretion of administration. You're trying to box them into a corner on the front end.
No, I'm trying to represent the taxpayers who are about to be charged above revenue limits for $8 million for a project, and nobody's representing them. That's what I'm looking
Well,
for.
we do have some very experienced maintenance staff,
The maintenance staff is not the same thing as a PE.
And if
but they
I,
know our buildings.
That's something that they could sit in on and give their input to, but they are not qualified to make design issue considerations.
and if I may, to be candid, I think the district is, if you're looking for professional engineers in the varying trades, candidly, that's why you would be hiring us. Candidly, it comes down to trust at the end of the day. Trust is not given, it is earned. And I'd like to think at this point, given the amount of time and the work and the time that we've spent, I would hope to have earned not all trust, but at least enough where we'd be able to begin this process. I believe that Glenn's team, they're a very capable team. I think they have the interests of the district at heart. I think, granted, they're not professional engineers, but to participate with, with the process, I think, as we've done in other districts, makes significant sense. The other thing too is to spend $200,000, and I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, to hire engineers to oversee the work that you've hired us to do, where we have professional engineers who will, at the end of the day, who are responsible for the performance of the stuff that is to be delivered. I mean, it's your decision at the end of the day, but I would hope that we've earned some trust at this point. And if not, then we have something else to talk about.
Well, to that point, that's one of the reasons why we have added this language, so that it's not complete, it's like trust but verify, right?
Yeah,
So
no, for sure.
This is the verification in the language that allows us to monitor the process. And I would say where a scope requires a bid out where Siemens is possibly the primary subcontractor, and it's a significant amount of scope. In that case, we may ask for a third party to enter in for a review, because there's a little bit of a conflict of interest between you as the main contractor selecting yourself as a subcontractor for some scope of the work, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to see this type of language in there.
Certainly.
And that could cause, as Mr. Edlins suggested, administration may feel that just to make sure that we have it all clear, that there's nothing, that we're getting the best value for our investment. They may elect to bring in a third party to do an assessment, just like Mr. Edlin, and I would trust them. It's a trust of them too, that they will decide when that is needed and when it's going to be cost effective, and when it's also going to be appropriate relative to the interest of our taxpayers. But I think we're all here for our taxpayers on this board.
Correct.
I don't think there's anybody who sits on this school board that doesn't worry about our taxpayers or the children we serve and their parents.
That's right.
Okay, or the staff, So, So that's, I just want that to be clear. It's just not one board member that worries about that. I think pretty much all 9 of us do. Mr. Como, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking back at where we were with the contract a couple of weeks ago and where we've come, you've met my expectations in terms of what I was hoped to read this evening, actually a couple evenings ago when we got a copy of the contract. I think everything that we asked for was included in the contractual changes. So my hat's off to both our attorney and to Siemens' attorney on that. I also have confidence in our administration. There's other times where we have to pull in consultants. I'll give you an example from an IT perspective. We don't have everybody on our IT staff that we need, nor do we want to hire everybody that we need. There's times when you do want to subcontract things out. And I do believe that our administration will use their best judgment. If they believe they need to bring an engineer in, they're going to do that for a project that may need a little bit more attention paid to the details, or we don't have an understanding of what needs to happen. And we do have the right to question whether or not the Siemens engineers are correct. If we're feeling uncomfortable with something, we should be doing that. I also know that one of our most important jobs as a committee and a school board is to hold people accountable. And so we will be expecting regular reports back to this committee and to our full board as to the progress of each of those projects. And it's going to be our responsibility to continue to ask these tough questions of administration. But I believe we're at a point where we've done a tremendous amount of work on this. We've had numerous meetings. We've involved not only this committee, but our full board. And I move to award the performance contract as presented to Siemens Industry Incorporated for the purpose of implementing the facilities improvement measures identified and approved by the board on September 10th, 2014.
Okay, I have a motion, simply because I want to keep it really open. I'm just going to second the motion, do the seconding. So I'll second the motion. I do have a little discussion and a few questions I'd like to ask and bring up before we move forward here and before I turn it over to the rest of the board. On one of the issues that we asked in the contract modifications, and I did ask Ms. Clifton, you can pretty much verify that almost all the requests we asked for changes were implemented in some way. I mean, pretty much. There weren't, it's just kind of surprising. I mean, I don't usually get lawyers to agree with me that often.
I'm not saying that all the changes took place immediately. We had said that before. But bottom line is there's everything there, with the exception of one time frame. There was, the original listing was 30-day notice upon any material change that we were aware of in any of the FIMs. We had requested that change to 90 days. They respectfully declined that change.
Okay. So one of the things when I pulled this up was 1.28, and I remember, because I'm always careful for words I choose in this particular category, whenever it was the convert system to Siemens Apogee or similar system. Well, similar means that it doesn't have to be anything more than similar, right? That's what similar system means, right?
Yes.
In other words,
Right.
we can accept something more or less as long as it's similar to Siemens Apogee. And that would be compliant with, as long as it met the energy needs, if that's an energy issue, as long as it would meet the energy needs of the proposal, it would be okay, right?
Yes.
Could you give me roughly one or two possible potential alternatives to Siemens Apogee that would maybe qualify as a similar system?
Johnson Controls,
Okay,
Honeywell.
okay. Rockwell?
Those are programmable logic controllers.
So they wouldn't.
Excuse me, so that would not be a building automation
So it'd
system.
be Johnson Controls, Honeywell, okay,
Train.
and Train,
Sure.
okay. So, So would we be seeking out in that part to make sure we cover those possible similar systems in the spec, rather than just being stuck with one supply that has Siemens stamped on it and, okay, and we can be assured of that,
Certainly.
okay. And we can be assured of that from the administration, that we're gonna hold them accountable for, okay, so. Mr. Adlin?
That brings up a concern. And the reason is because currently we have, is it 4 different building management systems
Yep.
in the district? So over time, we run into a problem where some companies went by the wayside. Some are obsolete. It meant having to deal with 4 different vendors. When companies were no longer around, it kind of became like supporting our student services software, where now what do you do? And I'm not a fan, no offense, gentlemen, I'm not a fan of having one contractor in control of everything, because it means that there is no competition, you're owned. I'm a fan of having 2 systems in a building, because there's times when you might want to put something out to bid, or if you're dissatisfied with the service you're getting from one company, you can go to the other company. But if we do it under this method, we're going to be inviting 4 companies to bid. And we could end up with, realistically, 4 more different brands in the district, which means 4 more softwares that we have to purchase.
Mr. Adlin, I don't,
2 and not 4?
Pardon?
You good with 2 and not 4? I mean, I'm just
Yeah,
asking
I-
because.
right, that's what I would
You
prefer.
wanted 2, but
Correct.
then you said 4 is an issue for you, 2 is okay.
Yeah, I prefer to at least have, I wouldn't go more than 2, and I wouldn't go less than 2.
but I think, Mr. Edlin, I mean, I guess that's possible. We just every time, I mean, where it says Siemens and Apogee are similar, we could pick a different supplier every time. I would find that hard to believe that the administration would want to do that. So we'd have 4 different suppliers.
Well, that's going to be up to Mr. Norder.
That's what we call that trust issue. I mean, what's reasonable, certainly you can weigh in at the time, as I'm sure you will want to, because.
Visit every job site?
Yeah, you're free to visit every job site. I mean, but what I'm saying is it's not very realistic. What you're saying is that we're just gonna automatically induce inefficiency, but then at the same time, you're saying we shouldn't have 1, but we should have 2, but we shouldn't have 4. What should we have?
I thought I was pretty clear on that. When you end up with 4, you end up with 4 times the problems of having 1.
Well, if you end up with 2, you end up twice the problems of having 1,
But you also create competitive bidding and efficiencies
as you do with 4.
and servicing.
Anyway.
With 4, you end up with
Headaches. Well, we do have
headaches.
headaches.
Thank
with
you.
the amount of-
Depending on the administration's day-to-day
There you go. There's that
explanation of what we have right now, it's headaches.
trust. Yeah.
How would you feel about 2, Glenn?
I'd be fine with 2. I have a couple HVAC guys who would be fine with just 1, because it would make their job much easier.
From a budgetary standpoint, how do you feel about that?
Budgetary standpoint, I'm a competitive person, so I like competitiveness also, so hopefully that, when we do that, that 1 that my guys like will be the competitive bidder.
Okay. Would you feel comfortable with 4 different companies bidding on it? And
No, I don't want 4 different companies. I want,
Right. that's my point. That's,
But 4 different companies, bidding's different than selecting.
Yeah, bidding's very different.
Four
from
different companies
selection.
bidding on
That's different than,
what? 4 different
Right.
programs?
right.
Absolutely not.
right.
I'm gonna tell you the God's honest truth. I'd love to have 1 system, because it would make it a whole lot easier for my guys.
Mhm.
So,
But you would maybe have 4 people bid for 1 system.
Right.
well, yeah, absolutely,
Right.
yes.
There's,
If,
Siemens doesn't do that, though. I mean, 4 different people bidding for 1 system, are you talking about installing it? Or,
No, we're talking about basically selecting the
software.
Whether it's Johnson Controls or Honeywell or Trane or Siemens.
well, them are proprietary, so there would be 1 bidder on it, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't believe there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, fellas, I can't believe that there's 4 different companies that will bid me Siemens
No,
Equipment.
Siemens is gonna provide one bid for their product, and that's it.
Right. And
But the
that's what
similar is,
the similar is, it could be Honeywell that would be bidding a Honeywell product, or not Honeywell, but someone will be bidding a Honeywell product, someone might bid, Johnson Controls might bid. The idea is to have more than just Siemens as a choice. As a choice, not as a selection. The selection may be just one company. It may be Siemens, it may be Johnson Controls, it may be Honeywell, it may be Trane. It may be Joe's Body Shop down on the corner, but I doubt it.
They're not qualified.
Mr. Como.
I mean, from my perspective, I think we have to put this in our administrators' hands. Glenn, you know what goes on day to day. You know what your guys need, what they don't need. It's really hard, how do I say this? It's one thing to have multiple people come to bid, but, whether you want to have one software versus two, where you get the competitiveness with two, okay, competitiveness of pricing, you lose the efficiencies of your staff, and then you have to double your knowledge. And so there's a cost to that. So I'm not really sure which is better from my perspective, and that's where I think we need to rely on our administration, whether they have to hire a consultant or not to help them with this particular process, or we just trust Siemens. That's really in the hands of our administrators. And we have to let them do their job. That is their job. And we hold them accountable from the reporting perspective and see how it's going. And, so it's not like all of these jobs are going to get done and then we get a report back. We're going to hopefully have ongoing reports and see how it's going. And I think we need to let our administrators do what we've hired them to do, and that's to operate this district. And we're setting up the scenario for them to move forward tonight, or to not, and to give them those guidelines, to give them the monies for that, to give them the direction, the high-level direction. But really, as Mr. O'Brien had said, the real hard, detailed work is still yet to come. And I think we have to let our administrators do their job.
And just to add to that, and I'll recognize you in just a second, Mr. Edlin, and when we get to some of these issues, and if it's a close call, I'm expecting the administration will probably be consulting with a third party to make a choice if Siemens happens to be the close call, and we want to make sure we're making the right choice if it's Siemens or not Siemens. So I assume if it's a complicated decision, I would expect them to consult a third party, so that we have good basis for who we select. That just didn't happen to just be Siemens. I'll recognize you, I'm sorry.
I just had one quick question for Rob. Does Siemens bid out the installation of your products, or do you have in-house people that install them, or how does that work?
Electrical subcontractors,
We bid out.
correct.
We have our own technicians who do the programming and the checkout and point-to-point, but we bid out all the actual electrician work as well.
Low voltage too?
Yes.
Who did Saratoga?
Don't know.
I have absolutely no
Sorry,
idea.
I don't have that handy. I can find out if
Yeah.
it's needed.
I don't want him doing more work in the district.
Okay, okay. We'll talk
Yeah.
with Glenn after the fact and find out if we can wrangle that up.
Yeah.
You know,
Thank you.
I think we've talked enough on it.
Well, I'll just put my concerns out there. I do have concerns with this process, okay? I really don't like the process very well. I think it's something that happens when you have someone trying to control things from afar. I mean, we're adding a little bit of extra burden and overhead to something that we should be able to do just as a board or as an administration without going through this process of trying to comply with a statute. But this statute has been put in place for this purpose, really, and in many ways. It's a statute that allows us to fix some problems, not only the inefficiency side, and do it in a way that's probably less disruptive, but at a cost. And I wish it wasn't that way, but that is the way it's been set up. I know the last time that this board, some years back, thought it was just okay just to ask the taxpayers, not know, figuring we'd get a no anyway about whether we'd raise taxes or not. It was pretty brutal, and we expected it to be a no vote, you know. And I've always said, you know, going to the taxpayers and asking them to vote to raise taxes is kind of one of the most insane things a person can do in this country. And because of that, and I think people have realized the insanity of it, they look at the reasonableness of maintenance and upkeep and improved efficiencies when they're there, that not necessarily should you have to go to the referendum process to do that. Now, we can all disagree with that, but I don't really like the statute, but it's the statute we have. And there's lots of statutes I don't like that I have to work under, and this happens to be one of them. So. Any further comment? Okay, I guess we'll take a vote on the motion then if there's no further comment.
Mr. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Edlin?
No.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
And Mr. O'Brien?
Aye. Motion passes 3-1.
Thank you.
Okay, now moving on to, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And you were very helpful. We wouldn't have been able to answer these questions without all of you. And thanks for the nice work by our attorney.
Anytime.
You did a very good job for us, sir. We
Glad to have.
appreciate it very much, and we've always been well served by your firm, so thank you.
Good to see you guys.
Yep. So the second item is a resolution to exceed revenue limit on a non-recurring basis. Ms. Clifton, would you have anything to say about this second item?
Well, now that we have a performance contract, we need a funding source. We've already gone and put the public on notice that the board intends to issue debt. We have followed through. We're well beyond the 30-day petition period. We did get no responses. I got actually no inquiries at all, nothing. But to following the statutes, it requires a specific resolution to be able to issue, I'm sorry, not to issue the debt, but to levy for the debt repayment. And that's what this resolution does. It allows us to use the exemption for energy efficiency measures to be able to levy directly for that additional debt payment.
I'm going to ask one question. Ms. Dudley, do we have an extra packet of this information
Yes.
here? Yeah. I came from the airport and I didn't even have time to
How many times are you
swing.
gonna say that?
I didn't even swing time by my phone, so.
Must have got a new job.
Yeah, it's called F&F chair. Satisfying job.
So you'll see that the resolution is a template put out by DPI, and basically we followed the exact format. The detail for the measurement for each FIM is listed. The savings identified by those FIMs is included in that resolution. There is an obligation to follow through annually with the actual savings amount to be disclosed as part of our public hearing.
Well, I'm looking for either a motion or comments. Mr. Como.
Just a quick question first, Lori. This still has to, if it passes this evening in committee, it still has to go to the full board, correct?
That is correct.
So this would be part of the meeting on October 28th?
That's correct.
Okay.
That meeting will have to first approve a performance contract. Second, approve the resolution to be able to levy for this repayment. Third, you'll have to adopt a budget. And finally, you will actually have to set the levy at the next meeting.
Okay. And just really very minor changes. If you look at the second bullet point, after the words therms and kilowatt hours, there's 2 commas. Just if we could take one of those out. And then we need a comma if you look at the third bullet, At the very end, it says total annual savings, $34,361,
Gotcha.
comma after that. So very, very minor. But this is, you said we followed a template provided by DPI?
Right. That fill in the blank was me, though, so those are my errors.
Okay, okay, fair enough. I would move to approve the resolution to exceed revenue limits in the amount of $2 million on a non-recurring basis per Wisconsin Statute 121.91, parent 4, parent O, for debt service payments included under the energy efficiency exemption.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Caffrey, motion by Mr. Como. Additional discussion. Mr. Edlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At our last F&F meeting, I had asked a question about fund balance, and it was stated that this year we will have a total of $8 million that will be going into fund balance
An increase, that is correct.
this year. Okay. I can't support this. On one hand, we're telling the taxpayers that in order to do all the things we need to do in this district, and this isn't all the things, it's just the things that we can hang a little sign that says energy efficiency around and be able to replace aging mechanical equipment and do upgrades, which is the responsibility of the district, that we need to go outside of revenue limits to do that. We need to send everybody an additional bill, and at the same time, the taxes which we've collected, state, federal, local property taxes, we've saved $8 million, and we're putting that in, not in the bank, but in our fund balance. So we've gone from a fund balance of 21 point whatever million up to 30 million in 1 year, which is incredible. It's like getting dinged twice in 1 year. So I can't support this.
Of that, the growth in the fund balance, $4 million was specifically from premiums, from going self-insured for health insurance. That was intentional because we had no reserve built up for future bad years, if you will, when claims exceed what our budgeting is for premium equivalency. So half of that was specifically earmarked for creating that health insurance reserve.
And one of the things, and I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Edlin, and it sounds, it sounds reasonable. But the problem with fund balances is exactly that. The $4 million fund balance is a reserve that's pretty much dedicated for healthcare. It's not something we can just spend on maintenance. We have to create that balance, and then if the balance gets big enough, we have to lower our premiums. How much we charge, how much the staff pays on their health care.
And that's a conscious decision we would make, that if we've created a health insurance reserve that we feel is beyond adequate, sufficient enough to cover 2 bad years in a row, whatever the criteria might be, then we can consciously set our premium equivalency lesser than what we anticipate claims would be, and dip into those reserves.
So in a way, it'd be like taking from the transportation fund to fund our schools. To take money from the fund balance relative to healthcare to fund our building maintenance.
Specifically for those pieces, definitely.
Yeah.
We do have for your review later on the agenda, as it happens to be, the fund balance policy. And that does address creating those specific reserves, but
And Mr.
that's-
Como?
Yeah, fund balance isn't like we have that amount of money sitting around to be used for anything. We have restricted funds, we have some that are unrestricted funds. And there are other restrictions that we've placed on many of the funds in our general fund balance. Hopefully, we'll have an update of that, maybe even at our next meeting.
it is. Unfortunately, we're kind of one meeting ahead of that, but the revision in the fund balance policy is coincided to also be presented with our audited financial statements, and you can see where that terminology comes from and how it's being applied.
And actually, for the first time since I've been on the board, and I'm in my 13th year, this is the first year that we will not have to borrow on a short-term basis pay interest to just meet our month-to-month bills. One of the reasons for that is we have a high enough fund balance to get us through that. So there's many advantages to having a good fund balance. I just want to put this in perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lori. We're looking at 23 cents per $1,000 of property value for this.
For this year,
Correct?
yes.
And so, to put it in perspective, if you have a $100,000 home, we're talking about $23. $200,000 home, $46. $300,000 home, $69. And $92 for a $400,000 home. Now, we haven't gotten to this part yet, but actually, people's taxes, even though we would be, if we would potentially be doing this, the taxes actually, the mill rate will be going down by 3 cents is what we're projecting right now, so.
This particular debt schedule was designed to take advantage of the higher than anticipated equalization aid that we're getting this year. Based on those lower expenses from last year, we aren't falling into negative tertiary. And if you recall our the funding calculation for equalization aid, there's primary, secondary, and then tertiary can either be positive or negative. In our case, because we are property wealthy, it's negative, and so every dollar that we have that goes into negative tertiary actually reduces the aid that we get out of secondary. So it actually takes us backwards. This year, and I do not anticipate this happening again, but we had no expenditures that fell into tertiary, so we had no reduction in that secondary level. And so our aids coming up, which then therefore reduces our property taxes on the general fund side. And so what we've done, if there wasn't any debt levy, our mill rate would actually go from $9.11 down to $8.85, if I'm remembering correctly. And that's quite a drastic drop. So we've packaged the debt structure. It's higher that first year. It's $2 million. The original schedules that you may recall seeing was a level debt repayment of about $1.2 million. So we're taking advantage of pushing the debt up higher, so interest gets paid off faster. There's less to pay interest on in those years 2 through 7. And still taking advantage of that mill rate so it doesn't drop drastically and then have to bounce back up the following year.
And we're trying to take advantage of low interest rates right now from a bonding perspective. We're also, we don't have any long-term debt, which for a district our size is rare, let's just say. So I think given all of the circumstances and the things that you just explained, I mean, a lot of things came together actually to allow us to, I think this is a good decision on the district's part to move forward with.
Mr. Edlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We saved $900,000 on fuel costs from our transportation fund this year by switching to propane as the fuel source for our buses. And that money is probably part of that $8 million on there. So I would think from an energy saving standpoint, since we've saved money on a fuel, that it would make sense to put that $900,000 towards more energy improvements. And I think back to a conversation about this fund where I had a question for Mr. Warren about it, about, I understand the fund balance and we really need to have a rainy day fund for emergencies. And the subject was brought up about boiler replacements, and the comment was made, well, yeah, if we have a boiler that goes bad, that's what we can use that fund for. So I don't know. I don't think that it's necessary to go outside of revenue limits to be able to fund these improvements. And if we, I get a question, would we really have done this if we didn't intend to go outside of revenue limits? And now the part that makes it look, just really bad for the school district of Waukesha is that we happen to be able to put $8 million in our fund balance in 1 year. And, we've been all about finding efficiencies, and that's what we hired this administration for. So we're finding efficiencies, and at the same time, we're going to reach into the taxpayers' pockets and pull out even more. And I don't think that that's the right thing to do.
Well, I think it looks really bad when you mischaracterize $8 million like it's $8 million of free money. I mean, $4 million comes from, at least $4 million comes from a segregated account that has to be kept segregated, other than we do benefit from using that money to avoid the short-term borrow, because we actually borrow from that. That free cash does help the
Fact,
district.
it's not segregated in a separate bank account.
Right,
And I do have to point out, fund balance is not cash.
right.
It's just the
Number on a
difference,
sheet.
it's the difference
Number on a sheet.
between assets and liabilities at one point
That's
in time.
exactly right.
I happen to have the cash flow schedule in front of me, our projection, and we measure on a weekly basis. We have payrolls twice a month and all those cycles. Just so you have an idea of the range, our low point is projected to be 2.8 million, and our high point is expected to be 43.7 million. So any given week, we can be here or we can be here. It drastically fluctuates depending on when taxes are paid out, when the state makes us an equalization aid payment, the day after payroll, the banking account looks much different than the day before. You know, we really have that fluctuation. So when you're talking about a $5 million payroll, and our low point being, you know, 2.8 million, that is not a lot of cushion.
Right, and another thing, when you start talking about 8 million like it's big money if it's in my checking account. I can tell you that. For any of our checking accounts, it would be big money, but for a school district that has $170 million of annual expenditures. And one of the things when we get to that section, and we'll talk about that when we talk about fund balance, there will be some information I'll be requesting as we go through that discussion, but to throw a number out there, like we're suddenly have $8 million like it's free cash and that this district's wealthy because of it, that's just not the case when you compare it to other districts relative to our overall expenditures. Mr. Edlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really do wish that this action item would have come up after we had the discussion about fund balance and the new requirements for it, simply because we don't have to put that money in a reserve fund for our health insurance right now. The way this agenda is structured and the way that we're going to be voting for it, we can do whatever we want with the unrestricted portion because we don't have the 4 categories that we're going to be voting on until we actually vote on them. So we don't have a recommendation of how much, whether it's 4 million, 6 million, how much should be going into each fund of that 8 million. And I understand that we need to build up the reserve balance. I totally get that. But until I see a recommendation that says we should be putting away 4 million until we get it built up to the industry recommended amount of X amount of dollars in that fund, and then we should be looking at, okay, now what are we going to do with the savings that we're going to have the next year because we've reduced our insurance costs? So, again, this is coming up because of a timing issue and what we have to do, but without having a discussion about what our intentions are for the fund balance, I think it does look bad. That's just my opinion.
It also looks bad to have an unfunded liability in OPEB of way more than our fund balance. And if we're going to try and run this district according to GAAP, which many people would say we should, we don't have a fund balance. We have a deficit. So, Mr. McCaffrey.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, Steve. I'm a cash guy. I like to pay my debts. However, I have a little experience with a district that, was self-insured, and then you get a kidney transplant or a liver transplant, and your balance is gone. And I am not willing to do that on a self-insured. I am all for the self-insured, but you have to have enough money to cover the unexpected. And in health insurance, every day is the unexpected. And the last thing I need is, I have fund balance to go down to $2 million one day, and then I'll have a big hit. And it happens. And the district I'm talking about, after that year of 2 transplants, they dropped their self-insured because it didn't cut it for them. And that is a smaller district than this. So let me tell you something. You say, oh, that's never going to happen in this district. They have about half the employees that we have. So don't ever say that something like that can't happen.
Mr. Edlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally agree with you.
That's
You'll get-
bad
you have-
news,
And
let me
that's why
tell
we
ya.
have stop-loss policy in place to help us out. However, that should have been a priority item on our agenda tonight over this.
I'm not debating that fact. The fact of the matter is, for me, it is a priority item, so I am not gonna second guess the
Oh.
administration on segregating that $4 million. I will not second guess them, because, like I said, I have some experience
Yeah.
in a district that, they had a little unexpected, issue with their insurance, and the next year, they were not self-insured, and all the savings that they had accumulated was gone in a year.
We-
1 year. So I will not second guess the administration on segregating those funds, especially when it comes to health insurance. And we all know what health insurance is like. We're living it.
Well, I'm probably letting things get out of hand as chair because we're actually mixing two agenda items, but we should probably stick to the motion. And your point is noted about preference to have had the other discussion before this discussion, and that's a point. Any other questions on the motion to hand? Discussion? Okay, let's, can we do this by, it says ayes and nays, but can we do it by a voice vote? Is that okay to do it by a voice vote, so we're on record? Okay.
Mr. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Edlin?
No.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
And Mr. O'Brien.
Aye. Okay, now, guess what? We have information items, and the first one on the agenda is the 2014-2015 budget update. Who's going to present that discussion? I'm probably trying to sort through some papers. It's been a rough night so far.
I was gonna say, I don't have it, but I guess I do. Just already slipped it aside.
Yeah.
So, we're at the point where we have all of our pieces in place for setting the limit for our tax levy, for calculating the final revenue limit itself. Joe, do you want to walk through those changes?
Certainly.
Joe's been taking some school business administrative classes, and one of his assignments is calculating the levy, so we've actually been letting him do a lot of this.
Well, it all starts out in the top of our tax levy summary with the revenue cap.
And that's the worksheet that's attached.
That's the second worksheet of attachment. And the revenue cap consists of two factors. It consists of our state equalization aid and our tax levy. And our state equalization aid, as Lori said, it increased $1,694,000. So as a direct result of that, our tax levy decreased. So it's a mix between the two. You can't just have your equalization aid go up without your levy go down. So as a fact of that, going down to our levy allocated to other funds, we have a combination of our regular Fund 41 levy of $1,125,000, and then $2 million additional debt service levy for the first payment that we're making on the $8 million borrow. And then going down to that, we have our total tax levy before computer aid of $79,275,000. And then you add in your computer aid,
Subtract it out.
subtract out the computer aid, and you get your state aid before chargebacks. And there's a new change with the legislation right now where the chargebacks that we had were incorporated back into the levy for reductions in property taxes. So that's why we don't have any levy chargebacks, because they went back in with the state equalization aid. So if you go down to the very second line to the last, we're starting out with our certified levy last year was $9.11, our mill rate. And this year, with the borrow, we're going to be at $9.08, which is a slight decrease. And a big factor in that, if you look at our very last line, is our certified equalization aid, our property valuation. That increased 2.13%. So that has a definite impact on the mill rate. So overall, without the debt service levy, we'd be at $8.85 in our mill rate, and our total tax rate per $1,000 of equalized value. And with the $2 million borrow, we're going to be at $9.08.
I just want to point out, so we added $2 million on to levy for the additional debt. You'll notice the with and without is just under a $2 million impact, because a portion of that ends up being in the computer aid calculation, and we actually get more aid because we're levying more. So it's kind of a little quirky thing.
So, just a little bit of a math thing, and if I'm a person, a taxpayer, and I look at, if I try to put it all in the aggregate, and Mr. Como tried to a little bit, but when you talk about total equalized value in the district, it's the value of everything in the district, which may include new construction. There may have been new construction that increased the value of property in the district from year to year. So if there was no new construction, the net increase in taxes on the average with no new construction, if everything was on a par from the year before, would be 2.13% minus 0.3%, more or less.
Yes,
More or
I
less.
actually followed that, yes.
Yeah, more or less. But with new construction, it won't be that high. It may be as much as 1% or 1.5%.
Yeah,
Something like
if your individual property hasn't changed, if your home value is still the same this year as last year, you're not gonna see anything significant because we're talking a 0.3% reduction.
But if somebody else, if you're,
But there's broader base to
someone else
spread
might
it
have had
on.
theirs go up more than last year, so they might see a greater increase in
Right.
taxes. And that's what we always try to explain to people. You can't say precisely how, what the district does affects your specific tax bill.
Right,
because
and
it's
if you
not
recall,
clear.
the town of Brookfield, we actually saw a decline in their value, which shifts a portion of their percentage of our bill is gonna go down because their mix in the total of the property values changed. We will have all that available for the board. We'll pull out the breakdown by municipality and put that back in there. So this is just an informational piece to let you know we're almost there. And these would be the taxes that we would be levying for.
So even though the mill levy's going down, we're not telling people their taxes are gonna go down. That doesn't necessarily.
I
compute
never
that way.
make that statement.
Yeah.
Because you're so correct, and it affects different municipalities differently.
We got was it $150 increase this year for state aid?
There's a separate state aid called per pupil adjustment aid, and you're correct, it's $150 per pupil. And it's based on the 3-year rolling average?
And did we have an increase in attendance this year?
No, we're still declining.
Still declining, okay. So we got less state aid than what we had last year?
Last year, that payment was $75 per head.
Right. But-
So,
But we have even less students, but we received,
so the aid
Double that.
doubled per student, but
Doubled
we
per
have a few fewer of them.
okay. So if it had remained the same as last year at $75, and with the drop in the average over 3 years of pupil enrollment, we would have seen an increase, we would have seen a decrease in our revenue cap,
It's outside of the cap.
outside the cap.
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
totally separate aid.
Additional funding from the state, so we would have had to come up with more money from local property taxpayers.
No,
Cover-
it's totally outside. If that aid didn't exist, we would have to reduce expenses to get a balanced budget.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a totally independent, outside of the cap income source.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for the budget update, or now let's move on to our favorite topic of the night so far, fund balance policy. Everybody's been waiting all night for us to get started on that discussion, I think.
Already discussed this one.
Yeah, you already know what it says. So, this was presented to policy last night. They voted to move it forward unless F&F would like to see changes to it. The outline of the various categories actually has been required under GASB. I actually want to say maybe 2 years ago it went into effect. So our financial statements have reflected these categories. I've just been remiss in getting the policy updated.
So, just because we had this little hot topic, and I think it's clear, it's really nice to have this, as Mr. Edlin said, it would have been nice to have this before we had our previous discussion, but we don't do things like that. We usually take care of action items first and then information items, but because there's people who are waiting on some of the action items usually. But the idea of taking money from the insurance fund is restricted under this policy because that would be a part of the restricted fund balance. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would fall under the restricted category.
Okay.
And-
Now, is that a recommendation, is there a recommendation external from the district that puts that in that category? Is that just something we chose to do?
No, it's defined that way by DPI.
Okay, so we're following the DPI definition of where we should be putting that in a restricted
Right.
fund balance.
These specific categories are dictated by GASB, and DPI has provided their interpretation and guidance on where certain items fall.
So
to help define
if Mr. McCaffrey should, per se, if he wants to buy a corporate jet for Mr. Gray, he couldn't use that restricted fund balance to do that.
That would be
It'd be outside our
specific for
policy.
health insurance. Yeah, afraid he's gonna have to find another source.
Yeah, so anyway, the idea is that we just, when we talk about fund balances and we talk about $8 million going here, or 10 million, or 6 million, it's not free money. It's money that is restricted quite often in some way. Mr. Como?
So if I understand this, this is one of those policies where we're trying to catch up to our practices.
Right.
Because GASB instructed this a while ago,
Yeah, I wanna say it was 2 years
a
ago.
couple of years, yeah. And DPI interpreted, and we've been following this. So we're just trying to catch our policy up.
So our financial statements in the last couple of years have reflected these categories.
Right. They don't look unfamiliar.
So we've been doing it, we just now are aligning our policy to reflect that.
Right, and we have on page 1, we have our current policy, which is devoid of the various categories.
Correct.
And if I understand this too, the first 2 bulleted items, those are considered restricted funds? And then the second 3 are unrestricted?
Correct. The first 2 are very firm on,
Okay, so in the unrestricted
used.
ones, we could possibly move things around? Would that be a good way to put it? We may have thought, well, we wanted it for this, but we still could possibly move it?
well, a lot of
Or
times
can you
they're
not move between
temporary.
categories?
Well, a lot of times they're temporary type of categories.
Okay,
Give you an example, when we encumber purchase orders, you've made a commitment. But as soon as you pay that purchase order, the commitment's gone.
and you can't really change that around. We
So-
can't say, oh, we've made that commitment, so that's an example of what we couldn't change. Is there anything in these unrestricted funds that if we started out thinking one thing, but we wanted to use it for another thing, that we could change our minds?
Anything that fell in, anything you choose to assign, or, trying to think of a really good example, and nothing's coming to mind. If you committed dollars to start back up the building project, building trades homes, and you wanted to set aside some funds and commit it to restarting that program, and a few years down the road, nothing happens, or you decide, okay, that program really isn't gonna be viable anymore, we're gonna do it for something else, you can take that commitment away.
Okay, and that would be that third bulleted item, the committed fund balance. It would fall
Correct.
under that. Okay. The only thing that I saw from our current policy to this policy that I think we really should include is in that second item. If you read the second item about 2/3 of the way down, I'm gonna pick up with, should the year-end audit fund balance of the district fall below the minimum amount? Do you see that? I'm gonna suggest that, we don't define, in this, it's not defined, the minimum amount is not defined, but in our old, or in our current, policy, we do define that as 10% of the general fund. I would think we should be specific there.
Okay.
So that would be something that I would maybe suggest that we have policy, forward that to policy. Other than that, you know, I think what we did really is we still have the same, pretty much the same policy. We've just defined it in more detail, and to bring it in line with GASB and DPI has had us reporting for the last 2 years. So other than that, I didn't really see anything else that would be of concern.
Mr. Evelyn?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It says that, that we're to maintain, let's see, this is item 2. The district shall strive to maintain an unrestricted year-end balance in the general fund that is equivalent to at least 15% of the anticipated general fund and special education fund expenditures. That's kind of in contrast with the prior policy a little bit, because in the prior policy, it didn't specify the general fund and special education fund. I think it was 15% of the total budget.
The reason that's more specific now, there was a time when the special education funding was in the general fund, and then DPI required it to be segregated into a separate fund. I think at the time the original policy was written, it was already inclusive. But the special education fund really has no funding source of its own. It's always dependent on the general fund and tax levies to balance it. That's that, if you recall, there's always a transfer between the two. It's, I want to say $17 million.
Okay.
So the general fund always is the supportive financer, if you
This
will,
is
of
the
special ed.
language change to keep up with current policy of segregating the funds. Okay, so now we're defining 15% for the unrestricted funds. What percentage are we recommending for the restricted and non-spendable fund balances?
We aren't, because it would be depending on their purpose. So let me give you an example of a non-spendable fund. Somebody donates money for the purpose of scholarships, and the principal has to remain intact. That principal is forever in the non-spendable category.
Right. I was thinking more of the restricted fund balance, where we're talking about building up a pot of money to cover us for health insurance losses. And do we have a recommendation for what that dollar amount should be?
Right now, we aren't there. Once our annual claims become predictable, I would say probably 3 months' worth of claims is a nice target.
Is there an industry standard for that?
Typically, 3 months.
Typically, the 3 months. And so will we be, at some point, given a dollar amount, so we know, I mean, I'd like to break this all down and say we've got $30 million, here's where this pot it is, here's where this pot is, so that we know, because right now, we're saying that we want to maintain a fund balance of 15% for the unrestricted, but we're not saying a fund balance for the rest. So, you know, at what point are we going to say, okay, we've built up our funds in both to meet our policy, and now we have to decide what we're going to do with revenue? Do we want to build a new junior high school with it? Do we want to, you know what I'm saying? We've got a lot of other needs coming up that.
Well, you as a board determine what the restrictions are. So I will come back to you with a recommendation on what I'd like you to set aside for that reserve, but you have to act on it.
Right, I understand
But-
that. So I'm just
but-
looking when that's coming.
Yeah, just one clarification, Ms. Clifton. I mean, restricted is sometimes defined by statute or expectations.
For some of those other funds.
You know, for instance, there's this perception that somehow we can take the healthcare money and just put it into our general budget. I'm sure that the people who pay the premiums, which is our employees, would be pretty upset about taking money from their salary that was intended to cover healthcare and use it to buy boilers or new carpet or whatever. And I'm not even sure it's even allowed legally to do such a thing.
Actually, it just, until you make that restriction, it falls to the fund balance.
Yeah, wow.
Without restriction. So that's why I would, in November, I will be actually bringing you a recommendation to create that reserve and in the dollar amount.
Okay, so we still have that coming forth later on.
Yeah.
So,
But I wanted to get you the
And-
policy in place so it made sense on what I was asking you to do.
in a historical context relative to the district fund balance policy, the other policy was so short and vaguely written because we didn't have a fund balance. I mean,
5%.
we, at one time, it was 0. And, we had a board many eons ago that felt that there was no need to have a fund balance, and they spent down the fund balance to basically 0. So, question for either Mr. Gray or Ms. Clifton, and I think it's hard to do because of the different way of people look at fund balances, is our fund balance today, in terms of how we define it, how it's being proposed to be defined, committed, assigned, and unassigned in the categories that we have, relative to your past recollection of other school districts, are we really high, really low, or just about right at this point in time? Maybe give us a letter grade. Relative to Janesville, would we be a C, D, A, or
You'd be right in line.
we'd be right in line
With
with Janesville?
their, now, they have been self-funded for health insurance for as long as I can recall. So they have a nice reserve, but they do use those categories, and as far as the unreserved, we would be about, now, keep in mind, my numbers are 5 years old, but
Right.
we
Well,
would be
Mr.
in
Grays
line.
are older, and I'm gonna ask him next.
Oshkosh. Say Oshkosh.
Yeah, well, Oshkosh or Appleton, well, which, Appleton, and what was the other district that you?
Oshkosh.
Oshkosh,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, thanks.
We're much stronger than they were. I mean, when I first came to Oshkosh, they had a $400,000 fund balance on a $49 million budget. So we worked that up to probably around 7-8 million. Appleton, same thing, that was worked up. It was taken down for some things to pay off. We tried to, I guess, buy out some early retirement things, but I think we'd be considered stronger than both of those in terms of fund balance.
But you're approaching that, if you said you're 7 or 8 million for a $55 million budget or something, probably by the time you got up to 7 or
Yeah.
8 million, you're approaching pretty much where we're at now.
Well, that 7 or 8 was on about
Percentage-wise,
100
yeah.
million then.
Okay.
I mean, as that grew, so did the overall budget. And that was during revenue controls, which revenue controls plus growing enrollments during the 90s there were no budget issues.
And our ability to grow our fund balance has been, in recent years, has been because of some changes we made in salary schedules and Act 10, and that's allowed our fund balance to accelerate more than districts could prior to some of these changes that occurred because of Act 10 or because of good bargaining, if you could do that prior to Act 10. So, Mr. Como?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Lori, but the reason why this is on the agenda is to give feedback potentially to policy in case we saw something that we were concerned about, right?
Policy is planning to bring this to full board in November.
Okay. As a first reading?
I believe they want to waive the first reading.
Okay, so it's a policy, so it needs two readings, so we're looking to maybe waive that second reading and just vote on it. Okay, so, yeah, I don't know if there are any other changes that people were thinking about. I thought the only one that needed to be fine-tuned was, defining that minimum amount. Steve, I agree with you that, we need to have a separate discussion as to where we're at with our fund balance. Take a look at how close we are at hitting that 15% of the unrestricted. Understand what is restricted, what those buckets are. And Lori, correct me if I'm wrong too. I thought that our insurance consultants were saying that we would want 3 months worth of reserve for our.
That's the typical recommendation, an established health insurance fund
But that's gonna change every year, right? I mean, every year we're gonna look at that because it's based on our claims.
Right, if-
And some
as
years,
inflation
we'll have
goes up-
good years where we don't have, and I define a good year as not having many claims, or dollar amount, the total dollar amount is low.
Avoiding those huge ones.
And then could be times, and I thought that our consultant said, you can plan on 1 in 5 bad years, maybe even 2 in 5 bad years, where you need to have that extra. So that'll be an interesting number for us to discuss, and when you come back to us with that, I'd like to have an understanding of what our insurance consultants say on that, and I know we're new at predicting that number, at least in this district, and to get a better understanding of not only that, but what else is in each of these 5 categories, how we got there, why, those kinds of things, and I hear you, Steve. I think I also want to make sure that we don't have too much money set aside and we're still borrowing. I get that. I understand that. I just don't think we have a complete picture of that right now, and we'll need that. We'll need that, definitely. And not that we've never visited these numbers. We do visit them. We visited them last spring, was the last time we looked at this, so.
Just real quickly, and I guess I want to ask that question. Based on this definition of the unrestricted, we're not at 15% yet, are we, on the unrestricted amount?
We're-
The
It's,
unrestricted calculation.
It's close, but we're not,
it's very close. It's within that margin.
okay, so we're not there yet, but it is close.
Not quite 15?
No, I think it may be slightly above that margin right now, but it's very close.
I just don't remember the breakdown.
Okay, well, that's
We'll
something.
look at that and provide that in the next meeting.
Right, that'd be good. I think that's what we need, is just keep track of that and understand that, because, and then what's typical across the state as far as fund balances, but problem is, everybody's a little different, right?
Correct. Yeah, so a district who is fully insured, say in their health insurance, doesn't have the same risk that we've accepted by going self-insured.
Right.
So their criteria might be a little different.
Mr. Edlin?
This is probably one of the best discussions that we could be having. It's always good to hear that you've got money that you're able to put in the bank, and you just have to figure out what bucket to put it in. It's a much better discussion than having to talk about which programs we're having to cut in the district. And, I really have to recognize 2 things for that. One is, I applaud Governor Walker and the legislature for Act 10 because it allowed us to make substantial changes to the way we do business. And that's a big plus. That's a big plus for our community. It's a plus for the school district. It's a plus for the students in the district and for the staff. And I think the second big pat on the back goes to the administration. We hired Todd Gray because we wanted somebody with a strong financial background. And Todd hired an excellent staff to be able to find us the efficiencies within the district to get us to the point where we're actually able to put money in the bank. And that's a good thing, Todd. That's a big compliment. And so thank you for the job that you and Lori and Joe have been doing over the last few years for us, because we're starting to see the fruits of some hard labor. Thank you.
Okay, I think that covers, we can go on fund balance policy all night, but really is, you got the feedback. You can either present that at the board meeting as well, or it can be communicated back to policy. Are you on policy, Joe? Okay, we'll make sure that they really should define a minimum. They left that out of the policy, so. And the minimum that we're somewhere around 10% or something, like the old policy said.
I think it passed out of policy as is, so I could make an amendment during the time, so.
Yeah, so we can take it up then, and you can, and it can be
And
voted
they
on.
did defer to FNF to ask for your feedback.
Yeah.
I have one quick question,
Mr.
too.
Edlin?
Thank you. In context, when you say 3 months' worth of reserve in the health fund, I'm not asking for a firm number, but just give us an idea in dollar amounts, roughly what's 3 months look
Annually,
like?
if claims are $20 million, we would be looking at setting 5 million aside.
Okay, so theoretically, if we have another good year next year,
We should be right where we want to be.
okay, we're in great shape. Thank you.
Okay, well, that takes care of that. Now we're on to the investment policy.
Okay, what I have here is our current policy as is. I've also provided copies of the state statutes, which I'm sure you all went home and read, right? Yeah. So I'd like to revise the policy, the investment policy. It is very detailed. I do not have the history behind why it is what it is. My idea was I would just reference the statutes and indicate that our investment policy, our investments should be restricted to what statutes allow. Yeah, and OPEB doesn't come into play here. And, but before I came back with a recommendation for changes, I wanted your input on what you might want to see or didn't want to see, or I just don't want to step into a mess if there's history here.
Mr. Como?
I think it's actually very wise to be more generic, or not generic, but let the details be spelled out in the statute. Statutes do change from time to time, but this chapter is the chapter that we ought to be following. So I like your idea there. Sometimes, though, our policies are meant to interpret and put into layman's language. So I don't know, I'm a little bit torn there, but I think it's definitely wise to, so we don't have to keep updating it all the time, to say we're gonna follow the state statutes, so. But then what would that whittle down to? I don't know what that looks like, so I'm not completely sure of what's all up in your head there. I guess I gotta see it before I,
Okay.
Well, one of the things, and when I would say looking at the investment policy is I think we're gonna have to rewrite portions of it, because I think portions of it were amended that probably should be unamended, and so we'll have to clean that up.
Yeah, there's some reference in there I'm not comfortable with.
Yeah, so, I think there should be language in the policy that states specifically that the district's investments in securities are to be conservative and highly rated investments, you know, not junk bonds or anything that could be considered risky, and make that in the preamble or something so it's clear that that's the target of the district with our investments, is always to be in conservative, low-risk vehicles. Mr. Como?
and I know, Laura, you're not like our #1 policy writer here. I mean, usually Lynn and Todd are working on that, and I'm sure that there are other example policies that we can get from WASB in terms of what WASB believes, and we can also leverage what other districts are doing. So it might behoove us to just kind of take a peek around
Okay,
to some of the other districts.
and we did look at a couple, and there's some that are much shorter, others that are quite a bit longer. You can kind of get the flavor. It's whatever the comfort level is at each district.
I think, you know, anything that refers to state law, because that changes from time to time, and it doesn't then necessitate changing the policy. I mean, the state law is pretty clear about what we can invest in and what we cannot, and also the fact that school districts are no longer a sophisticated investor. I think thanks to us, 4 other districts, but I did notice our current policy still allows us to invest in collateralized debt obligations, so.
I was just gonna recommend a
I really
strike
wanna be
G.
fixing that
I was trying not to mention those words, Mr. Gray. I was trying to do that without stating that we're gonna,
Okay.
They went to settle.
But it doesn't say synthetic, so we're good.
they're both bad. Yeah, doesn't matter whether they're synthetic or not, they're both bad. Yeah. Okay, we should know that by now. Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's the direction I was looking for.
Okay, the last information item is use of school facilities policy. Do we use school facilities?
We have a lot of use of school facilities.
Okay,
The area I am getting more and more questions on is with our new stadiums and the artificial turf. And is the value set aside in our current policy adequate? And on the very back side, I've given you some comparisons of nearby districts and what they charge for their stadiums. And you can see it's all over the place. So I do not have a recommendation on any changes, though I do think it might be appropriate to have a separate fee if you're using the lights and the scoreboards, a separate charge for that, which we haven't in the past. But we do have more interest now because we can utilize our stadiums for more hours of the day and not be concerned.
one of the things I'll say is, you know, in the past, because we didn't have artificial turf, and also because of the construction challenges we had with our turf in one of our fields, Kettle Moraine, I think they're probably the closest district to us that we've had a relationship with in the past, and that we should probably kind of look at what they're doing as a close guideline.
You'll see they're right in the center of that list on the back side. They did charge us, when we moved to their stadium, they did charge us the $500 rate per event.
Okay, so, you know, I think we're all, we might even have a policy where use of fields might have a, this is the rate per, I guess if we just, these rates aren't very high, so I guess anybody can pay them. I mean, it's not a big deal for a district to pay $500 to use your football field or something right now. So,
Well, our policy specifically is written per hour.
okay,
And we actually do not have a stadium fee. We have a varsity fields fee.
yeah. And we're probably gonna have to put some work into this, simply because of that. Those fields will get used a lot.
And I thought we
There'll
should
be
address it up
demands.
front before
Right.
we get too far down that road.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, I kind of found it intriguing. What Franklin does is they look at who's using it, whether they're out of district or in district, and whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit. And they really pop it up for for-profit, and they pop it up for out of district. More than double, actually. So something to think about. I think that especially the out-of-district aspect could potentially be higher, just it wasn't paid for by those people, you know, the community paid for this, so I could see considering that factor in here, so.
We also have, Mr. Edlin, go ahead.
Thank you. Just one correction on there, it says football stadium's grass, should say synthetic field. How do we charge for WIAA sanctioned events? I mean,
They do not pay for the
Yeah,
stadiums.
we don't charge for that.
even if our teams are out of
We get a
it?
percentage of the gate.
No, we don't charge for
Okay.
that. A small percentage.
Okay. I did have some other things in the policy that I think need to be addressed, so when we're done, I don't know if anybody has more questions about fields.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder, we're not really the policy committee. Usually, don't we just set the fees as F and F and let policy be handled by policy? I mean, otherwise we end up doing policy and, so we should, Mr. Como, what's the
I think
history
what
on this?
happened is we set the fees last year for all of our fees,
And did the
and then
fields.
we voted to actually go forward with the fields. So it came afterwards, so I think our administration's just in a conundrum right now, so we might just,
We should readjust the fees.
yeah, readjust the fees because of the stadium changes.
Correct.
So this is just, I think we
Yep,
should just have an action item just on that specific fee.
yep.
Yeah, next,
Yep.
yeah, we can, in the future, you can come back with
And I
recommendations
don't know
on
if
fees
it's,
and action items.
if it's
And then
a recommendation
policy
to
would go to
policy
policy.
and we kick it back to them and they revise, or if it's just the fee portion that we implement.
No, policy could set in there a schedule to be reviewed by FNF and give FNF the authority to revise those fees, rather than having policy do it.
The only thing that I had question on was definitions, and this is something that might affect the fees, I'm not sure, but on the first page, there's a bunch of bulleted items, and it talks about non-for-profit groups. I'm looking at the third one, and it's pretty consistent throughout, but non-for-profit groups that provide recreational experiences to students. What's the definition of students? Are we talking, I mean, Carroll College has students too. They've got their own fields, but if it's cheaper for them to use our fields,
Typically, I interpret that to be students K through 12.
okay. Just,
Students-
if we just clean
students of
that
the
up.
district.
Yeah,
But that's a policy thing.
right.
I
But it
don't-
affect the rates. I mean, somebody's gonna come back and argue the policy with us just because we weren't clear, so I'll leave that up to Lori to,
Yeah, I would say that let policy deal with the language and we'll deal with the rates. I
Yeah.
mean, if, we'll just have to take what the policy says and make our decision on rates, and if they want to revise. Mr. Como?
As a matter of fact, I think if we decide to change the fee, we just pass that on and it's just automatically gets changed, so,
yeah.
yeah. I don't think there's a vote on, in policy for that then.
Right. Okay, so you're gonna come back with some fee recommendations. You might wanna go through policy before you come back with fee recommendations to cover any language changes or any additional descriptors before we do the fee changes. Just so that we don't have to redo it again after we change the language. I think Mr. Edlin makes a point there. We probably should have the language cleaned up before we actually say what fees should be, so. Okay? So this might be a little bit longer process than just the next. Let's put policy to work. They need some extra.
Right. All last name.
I appreciate the help.
Okay, well, it's been a long day for me. I don't know about you guys. I'm ready to adjourn the meeting unless anyone else has anything to add to the last item. Okay. The meeting's adjourned then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.